And before we proceed to our talk today, I just wanted to give everyone a quick bio about our speaker for today. Like Shamshir Bhatti said, our speaker today is Suchitra Vijayan. Suchitra was born and raised in Madras, India. She's a barrister by training, and she's previously worked with the United Nations War Crimes Tribunals in Yugoslavia and Rwanda before co-founding the Resettlement Legal Act project in Cairo, which gives legal aid to Iraqi refugees. She's also an award-winning photographer and the founder and executive director of the Polis Project, a hybrid research and journalism organization, and her work has appeared in many mainstream outlets such as Washington Post, GQ, Boston Review, Foreign Policy, and many more. Her latest project is her book, Midnight's Border, which will be published in February 2021, so do keep an eye on for that book. And without further ado, I'll be passing it on to Suchitra. As she's giving an introduction to the topic, if anyone in the Sangat has any questions, you guys can place your questions in the Q&A dialog box within Zoom. The button for that should be at the bottom of your screen. And we'll try to get through as many questions as we can today. And without further ado, I'll pass it on to Suchitra.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for curating a series of these conversations. I saw the one with Navyuk before, and I want to start. The reason I'm starting by thanking these hosting these conversations is because these conversations are not just an intervention. It's also a way for us to build community. And one of the things that the right wing has done successfully, whether it is India, whether it is the United States, whether it is England, or even in Canada, is that the right wing has really occupied and captured the public space in ways in which are both baffling but also understandable, because they've been able to take on public discourse in ways that I feel sometimes the progressive and the left voices haven't. And that's why conversations like these are absolutely important. And I call them million little mutinies, even if it is 5 or 10 of us getting together and having those conversations. So thank you so much for doing that. Today I've been asked to kind of look at 3 important things, and what I'll do is I'll try and keep it as brief as possible, and then we can have more conversations as a part of as a Q&A process. First is looking at Hindutva and Hindu Rashtra, its origins and what it means to think about Hindutva within the Indian state post-1947. Second, looking at what BJP has done since 2014. And finally, thinking about all of this within the context of resistance. I'm going to start with what the Hindutva and the Hindu Rashtra project is. I think one of the things for us that is very important for us to understand now at this moment is that Hindutva is not a recent phenomenon. It's a 100-year-long project. Modi's BJP is right-wing, they're Hindu nationalist, and it's a party built on the basis of, is the political wing of the Sangh Parivar. And Sangh Parivar is modeled after Italian fascists and German Nazis. And one thing that you will kind of encounter as soon as you start reading the foundational text of the Sangh Parivar is that its founding fathers, whether it's Sarwarkar, Golwalkar, and many, many others in their writings, public conversations, have repeatedly emphasized the ideological debt to the fascist movements. Similarly, the RSS and the Sangh's paramilitary forces are modeled after the Nazi SS. Recently, the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh said that he's going to create a local organization that is going to think about policing the communities. And that, again, is built on very similarly modeled on the basis of the Nazi black shirts, who were actually used as a way to enforce the Nazi regime's local politics, or enforcing or finding ways to create fear in local communities. So what you really see is that not to think of Hindutva as something that's recent, but something that has been in the making for over 100 years. In the word of another historian of fascism, the RSS and the Sangh in India are one of the longest running fascist movements. It was founded in 1925. What is interesting is that BJP has successfully branded itself as a social service and a community-based organization. If you look at it, they will use the language of social service. They will think about the shloka camps. But what they really have done is really excel at a rebranding campaign. But if you think about it, as recent as 2015, India's then finance minister Arun Jaitley actually referenced Hitler in a parliamentary debate. And one of the things for us to really understand is to start naming the beast. Hindutva is fascist, its politics are fascist, and it uses fascist tactics. Another thing that I really want to raise, again, as a way for us to think about and have a deeper conversation, is in my opinion, I believe that even the word Hindutva no longer captures the true horrors and monstrosity of what is happening in India right now. While Hindutva takes inspiration from the fascists and Italian fascists and Nazi Germany, I think in India now, Hindutva is mutated into even more grotesque, more violent, more scary of form. And also, remember that last time Nazis were put down, you needed two large territorial armies of the Soviets and the Americans coming together in the name of the Second World War to put it down, which means that what is in front of us right now is something far more insidious. And even if we politically manage to win over immediately in terms of the farmers' protests, EA and NRC, what we have again is a 100-year-long project of reclaiming our communities and societies back. And one of the things that is really important for us to understand about the fascist politics, and I really would suggest all of you to read Professor Jason Stanley's book about how fascism works, or at least how many democracies and its politicians use fascist techniques to take over state. I think it's a phenomenal book for us. It's a phenomenal book because it kind of lays out. It's easy to read, but it also lays out the roadmap for us to understand how fascist techniques and fascist politics can be used and co-opted within democracies. Because fascist techniques, fascist politics is not only limited to authoritarian governments, they're not only limited to totalitarian regimes. Democracies can very quickly become illiberal. Within this context, I want to go back to the idea of naming the beast, which is that it's time for us to stop calling India the world's largest democracy. From the very things that have been happening on the ground, I think it's really important for us to name the beast. So it's not just the Hindutva project that we're thinking about, we're also thinking about to rightly articulate what this very moment means in order for us to respond. Because resistance in a democracy that is ruled by people who flaunt a few laws is very different than resistance and protest under an authoritarian, increasingly or already a fascist regime. Because in this case, what you've really seen is what has happened to those who came out in Shaheen Bagh, what happened after the CA and RC protests. So for us, understanding that India perhaps is no longer a secular democracy is also an important part. It's not only rhetorical, but more importantly, it is tactical and is strategic, because how you fight a fascist regime is very different than how you fight for rights within a democratic regime that will actually respect your rights. And now, within all of this, one of the things that we have to also understand is that the Hindu Rashtra is already here. It's not coming. India's destruction as a constitutional democracy, in my opinion, is also almost very close. And the Sangh Parivar, through the BJP, has actually captured state power and uses its full capacity to further its goals. Institutions of a secular republic have been dismantled, courts are no longer free, and what we're really left with is a death of a secular republic, which means steady erosion of rights, disenfranchisement of citizenship, turning citizens into serfs. And that's where the Farm Bill is so important to resist, is because it kind of takes it's read along with what happened with the CAA and NRC. It's important to understand that every single one of the decisions, laws that have been implemented by the BJP is to actually erode citizenship and turn the citizens of a democratic republic into subjects or serfs with limited rights, in which that people return to a place where they're seen as labor, they're seen as nothing more than people whose data can be mined, people who can be exploited and plundered, but not as rights bearing citizens. Having said that, I think it's also important for us to think about the dehumanization of minorities, the inhuman treatment, political prisoners, mass imprisonment that's happening. And also, there are now reports coming out saying that seriously, people are actually thinking about employing counterinsurgency practices as a way to start implementing the NRC and CAA, as in you would go into these neighborhoods, start using counterinsurgency strategies, demanding that people show their documents. So these are all concerns that have been raised by those who are local rights activists. Now, going to the second part of it, what has happened to India since Modi is come into power? One of the other things I really want us to think about is that while 2014 is definitely a break, a very essential break in terms of norms, in terms of institutional, constitutional morality being completely eroded, in terms of institutional erosion, 2014 is not when India stopped being a constitutional republic or stopped being a secular republic. The road to hell has been paved through many, many decades. We really have to think about how BJP captured power through a larger, more in depth understanding of what's happened in the country. And one of the things for us to think about is what Modi has done. The use of hate speech, but also the use of political violence by the state, which is absolutely important for us to think about. What I really want to do is kind of go back and think about use of state violence as a means to capture political power. And this starts with the BJP understanding very early on that use of violence, especially violence against minorities, otherization, is not only important for them ideologically, it also helps them win elections. I'm going to quote some numbers from the book that looks at what happened after the Rath Yatra that LK Advani started in the 90s. So, what is really important for us to understand is that, for example, in 1984, BJP won 2 seats. In 1989, it won 89 seats. And in 1991, the BJP wins 120 seats, making them the largest opposition party. Each of these electoral wins happened after an episode of deep violence, violence that was unleashed in the country. If you look at the Rath Yatra that happened, that was inaugurated by LK Advani, what you look at is that the number of riots that happened, it happened throughout the country, but UP has 28 riots that happened soon after the Rath Yatra. Gujarat has 26 and Karnataka has 22 and Rajasthan has 13. And even states like Kerala and Tamil Nadu, which is considered to be the bulwark against fascism, you still had 1 or 2 riots. While they are not as many as UP, what you really see is that this movement actually polarized the country in ways that we are still seeing the effect. Second, the riots that happened in Uttar Pradesh killed 224 people. The ones that happened in Gujarat killed almost 100 people, and then Karnataka 88. And these are numbers from 1989-90 after the Rath Yatra happens in September 1990. So one thing that we have to understand is that BJP uses state violence as a way to actually win political elections. So this is not just ideological for them; it is actually core to who they are. As an organization, as a strategic, as an organization, as a strategy, and as a tactic. Similarly, if you think about the Gujarat riots, also let's remember that Modi's first term as the chief minister of Gujarat, he was not elected. He is in some ways replaced by the BJP Sangh high command. And then the Gujarat violence happens, and then Modi comes to power with a resounding electoral victory. He uses the same techniques in 2019, soon after the what's happened with Ayodhya, the verdict. He actually again uses the same rhetoric. So the use of violence is something that is core to what BJP has done. Now, the real difference between 2014 and what the BJP has done for the last 100 years is from 2014, something really changes in that before it was state violence that was very effectively used. What BJP then unleashes is the use of collective public violence, where it has enabled the people on the ground to then police and inflict violence on minority communities. That's what you see with the lynchings. That's what you see with crimes against. That's what you see. When you look at violence against many other communities, whether it's Dalits, whether it's Adivasis, whether it's women. What you've really done is it's no longer just the state that employs the violence or even the party cadre, but what you really see is that the average person has been enabled to kill. At that point in time, it becomes impossible for us to hold violence. And just as violence is used as a way to discipline and punish, you bring in legal mechanisms. The police becomes the arm of the state. You see a consistent and ongoing disintegration of rights. And that's exactly what the BJP has done. Now, within the resistance movement, and I think we all know what happened with the CAA and NRC protest that happened, it was a moment of great hope, just seeing so many people on the streets fighting for their rights, centering the constitution as the way to think about the future. At the same time, we also know that soon after that, February, the violence is unleashed in Delhi. We have so many young people arrested. Many of them continue to remain in prison for the crime of resisting, the crime of committing journalism, the crime of being an Indian citizen. And now that is being compounded by a sense of rounding up the frontline defenders, the Bhima Koregaon defenders, whether it is Dr. Anand Teltumde, Shraddha Bharadwaj, Rona Wilson, Dr. Stan Swami. And at the moment of great disillusionment, what we really saw was the farmers' protest in Punjab. In some ways, it has injected this great sense of hope and resistance of what the average people have always been. The average people in India have always resisted the state. The only way for them to exist is to resist the state. And Punjab, with this long history of resisting state violence, constantly being put in a place to not only justify their loyalty to the Indian Republic, but at the same time, the very same communities that have been in the receiving end of deep violence understand how resistance work. And I think, in my opinion, again, I'm not on the ground, so I would concede, I would let the people on the ground and others who have more knowledge, very specific to Punjab and its local communities, address this and talk more about it. Is I feel like they've come with a sense of learning, sense of what it takes to resist, but also bringing to bear the long history of learning to resist the state. And I think that really brings us to a very important moment, which is the Indian state now seems, they were afraid during Shaheen Bagh, and now they're even more afraid, because I also have to understand that what this means is that with the Muslim community, the demonization also meant that it is easy to demonize the Muslim community. Not that it has not been easy to demonize the Sikh community, but you also have to understand that the Sikh community, especially the Punjabi Sikh community, takes a really interesting point within the Republic, in that they hold a place in which it is harder to kind of bring in the kind of violence that they've used. That doesn't mean that that violence will not be used. For example, we've also already seen that tear gas has been used, baton charges have been used. And I think what we're really seeing is planning, preparation, and a deep understanding of what the state is capable of. And I think those are all moments for us to learn from and build on. At that point, I'll kind of open it up to questions and kind of let you guys decide what trajectories you want to take this conversation forward.
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. There's so much to unpack in that introduction. We wanted to start off with you talked extensively about the RSS, how it has expanded over the years, either through BJP or various different means. One thing we wanted to know is, what is their end goal? What if, say, they were you've said that to a certain degree they've already created a Hindu Rashtra, but it's not something that's going to be taking place in the future. It's almost already here. According to them, what does their vision look like once they've fulfilled it? What are they trying to accomplish, and what is their ideal vision for a state?
Um, One thing about the Sangh Parivar and BJP is that everything that they've done, they've already told you they're going to do it. All you have to look at is the BJP's political manifesto. right? That is, in some ways, the absolute political manifestation of what they want to do. They had NRCCA in it, they had the Delimitation Commission in it, they had the Ayodhya in it. So, in some ways, we already know what they want to do politically. For them, establishment of a Hindu Rashtra. Now, what is this Hindu Rashtra that they're establishing? So, also let's understand that it's not only political, it's also economic, and who gets to do what. So, I think that's also equally important. But let's start with the political. Understand that the fascist movement aims at creating one kind of subject. One kind of, so already we know that based on the foundational text that they don't believe that Christians, Jews, Muslims are not even part of the body politic, right? For them, the body politic is Hindus, and in that they include Sikhs, they also include others who are not traditionally Hindus but have bought in. They've been bought into the Hindu fold, as in to say that this is. So for them, they want to create. There can only be one kind of a Hindu who only eats one kind of food, only believes in one kind of value. So the homogenization is absolutely important, because without the homogenization, the idea of Hindutva just begins to fragment, right? And I think in some ways, what has actually been resistance to Hindutva is also the fact that India is so diverse. The subcontinent is so diverse that even even for me, my parents, I'm a child of an intercaste marriage, which means that my parents speak different languages. But also, as people who grew up in the South, their customs, their practices, the food is so different. The masala that you use in your house to make something is not the masala your same family would use. So that diversity of what it means to be someone who is in the subcontinent is in some ways is also a resistance to Hindutva. But that's the first thing. The creation of a Hindutva state, which is, we can only be one kind of worship, one kind of Hindu, deeply patriarchal, deeply fascist, and also casteist. Let's not forget the caste angle, right? Hindutva can only exist if caste exists. That's why any practice that is an act that resists caste is deeply problematic. Any anti-caste movement, because that's another reason why we have to incorporate anti-caste ideas within any protest movements, is because creation of hierarchies then help Hindutva. So that is political. Second, economically, I think the state is built to benefit a few. Who has benefited from the BJP being in power? Who are the people who've become rich? Who are the people who are allowed to plunder? Who are the people who are allowed to make money off the backs of the people, right? So money is second. Oligarchies need fascism, and fascism needs oligarchy. And now in a neoliberal economy, these two are not separate. They actually feed into each other.
And
Thank you.
I think you mentioned a few important points. I just want to dive in further. And one of the points you mentioned briefly is under this homogenized society, one of the things that Hindutva regime would always resist is any work that's done around uniting different castes or anti-caste-based discrimination stuff. When we look at, if say this Rashtra, like you said, it is forming. Where does roles regarding different genders? How does that play out? How do they view women, for example, and their role in society, and how are the new policies that are coming out impacting them and overall? And one of the things we saw was when Article 370 was revoked in Kashmir, the kind of rhetoric that was coming out there. So what kind of rhetoric does this whole philosophy or ideology create space for?
I think, as I said, we go back to the foundational text. And I'm not a scholar of gender, I'm not a scholar of caste. So much of what I'm saying now is based on my own reading and understanding. So if I'm wrong, then that's on me. So Hindutva really, as I said, borrows from Italian fascists and Nazi Germany, and all fascist movements view women in a very specific role. A woman's role is to produce the pure lineage that will then go on to create the pure race. And that is true of Hindutva too. That's one of the reasons why the UP's recent laws are very, very specific. That's one of the other reasons why in India, killing young men and women or young couples from different caste is so I mean I don't know why it's, I mean I hate the word honor killings, but that's what they are. You kill someone for the, again, for the crime of committing the sin of loving someone who is not like you. And again, that goes back to the idea that the woman's body belongs to the family. The woman's body's role is to produce a lineage that will then create a pure, the purity is very important, right? The Brahmanism also does that. The politics of purity is so important to Brahmanism and patriarchy. And again, Brahmanism is very much a part of the Hindutva. Without Hindutva, without Brahmanism, it's hard for us to understand how Hindutva is born. So a woman can only be seen as an object that can produce more children, which means that we think of, for example, the Prime Minister Modi said that, oh, plant a tree today, and then in 25 years, the tree will help you get your daughter married. As if marriage, again, why do we think of marriage? We think of marriage because what does marriage as an institution do? It creates and sustains patriarchy. It makes it possible for women to then go on to produce more children. And this idea of purity is important because why are you killing people? You're killing them because you think that a Muslim man and a Hindu woman should not be in love. You believe that people of different castes shouldn't. So I think that is very important for us. Again, they're all intertwined. In terms of gender itself, you really think about the role of women within Hindutva. The body politic of Hindutva is that women also play the role of instigators. Women in Hindutva, like in all fascist regimes, in all authoritarian regimes, all societies where you've seen genocide and violence happen, women also become active participants. Their body is not only seen as the body in which territorial ownership of patriarchy is marked, but their body, they also become active participants. Again, understand that women are also violent. In the case of Gujarat, we know how women participated, not only helped bring weapons to the riots, they also participated in the killings. So I think it's very important for us to understand how Hindutva sees women and how their bodies are positioned as a way to produce a line. Again, as I said, I'm not a scholar of caste, I'm not a scholar of gender, but there is already existing work that is done extensively that looks at this.
Thank you so much for that. So, I mean, everything you're saying is like deeply resonating with me as a Sikh and as somebody, that believes that, opposition to fascism is key to what we have to do as human beings. So you're talking about, this idea that Hindutva is here, and it's, it's a process that's taken decades to arrive at. And in terms of fighting fascism, so from like the Sikh context, Sikhs have been fighting against Hindutva for a really, really long time. So if we take it outside of, the immediate political context of the BJP, the Congress, for us, hasn't been a solution to Hindutva. If anything, they've been equal advocates for this, the Hindutva project. And, we've clashed with them so many times. And, everything that you're saying to the BJP, if we look at it from a Sikh context, can equally be applied to the Congress, especially this idea of, the monopoly of violence and, enabling the average person to kill. So that was like the justification in Delhi in 1984, right? It was an existential threat that our mother has been killed. Now we have to kill these Sikhs, right? And also like this context of demonization is equally applicable, especially when it comes to Sikh resistance. It's something that's a prevalent idea to the point that Sikhs have internalized it themselves. They want to distance themselves from insurgency. So with all of that, how do you look at fighting against fascism? What is the solution if it's not within the electoral system of the subcontinent? How do you then frame fighting against fascism?
You're absolutely right, and that's one of the reasons why I said fascism did not arrive in India with BJP. It arrived with the founding of the republic. And one of the books that was that I would urge people to read is Gyan Prakash's book on Indian emergency, where he makes a very interesting argument that the many of the problems of the Indian Republic, the emergency is not an exception. The authoritarian tendencies that you see that the Indian state has employed were already foundational to the constitution. And we see that with what happened in Punjab. We see that with the indiscriminate violence that was used. ASFA was not introduced by BJP. ASFA was introduced by an Indian state that deeply believed that certain parts of the country had to be bought to, had to be disciplined in order for them to become, what I'm saying is that they were incorporated into the body politic of the republic, not through consensus, but through absolute violence. India is also the only other country to have bombed people it considers its own citizens, right? I mean, the only other country that did it was the RAF, that when it bombed the Kurds during colonial period. Again, the Kurds were considered to be British subjects, but they were still bombed. Similarly, we have the Indian state bombing, its own people. So what you really see is this indiscriminate use of violence to incorporate people into the body politic of the republic, as seen by the center, who's already drawn its maps in a very specific way. And that unleashes a series of consequences. Also, let's remember that while we talk about Article 370, the first time Kashmir's access to mobile telephone and text messages was cut down was under the Congress, under P. Chidambaram, who puts in, today Mr. Chidambaram can talk about rights, but yes, Salvajudam that was raised, the paramilitary force that was raised in Jharkhand. So the monopoly of violence of the Indian state, one has to understand, has a long, insidious history. And often the problem is not only that this violence has been used, but also that there's been no justice for this violence. Right? Whether it is the case of what happened in Punjab, what happened in Kashmir, what happened in Manipur, in Assam, in Nagaland, there's just been no. So that's the first thing, that we have to understand that even if we electorally defeat BJP, the strains of this have always existed. Second, I think it's important for us to understand that India is a deeply casteist country in which hierarchies determine who gets to govern and who doesn't. Even whether it's the BJP or the Congress or even regional parties, who gets to govern, right? Have we seen, given that we have so many localized leadership, who then gets to become the political leadership in India? And I think that is also something that we really have to keep in mind. Having said all of that, let's also understand that the state will act in a very specific way in order for it to sustain itself. The monopoly of state violence is always going to exist. But let's not forget that the fascists are here. You could have still fought the Indian state to a certain extent before 2014 in some ways. I think 2014 has just made things a million times worse. I think the degree is something that we have to understand. It's not that things were great before. What we have to understand is that there's a mutation of this there's a virus that is mutated in ways that I don't think we still understand how horrible this grotesque monster is. Not that this monster didn't exist, it's always existed. How do we fight? I think one of the things that I'm increasingly thinking about is that our petitioning to the great constitution that Ambedkar gave us was not a revolutionary constitution for many people. It was definitely not a revolutionary constitution for those in Punjab or Kashmir, simply because that very same constitution did not guarantee the right of life and liberty to Punjab or Kashmir, or ask those in this country who are incorporated into the body politic of the republic what they wanted or what their idea of freedom was. Right? I think that's second. And second, perhaps we need to start thinking that our rights are maybe not connected to a document that was man-made. If today we say that my rights are born out of a book that a bunch of men made, then does it mean that as men today have decided that NRC and CAA means that you no longer have rights? Does it mean that I have no rights? Does it mean that you and I have no rights because a body of men and women have decided to take it away? So perhaps for us to think about is to think beyond the Constitution, that you and I have the right to life, dignity, liberty, beyond. That is just inalienable. No court can rule on that. No court should rule on that, because that is just fundamental. If that becomes the core of our resistance, then what we are fighting for is beyond the Constitution. It's beyond a request to go back to the status quo, is a radical reimagining of what we want our societies to be, what we want the future to be. And I think that is how we start. And we start by asking those questions now. We start by asking those questions of how do we want to constitute ourselves? How do we see ourselves in 5, 10, 15, 20 years? And only then, and again, we don't have to come to consensus. And I think that's the beauty of federalism, is that how different people rule themselves is completely up to them based on their local history and memory. And I think that kind of radical reimagining is not so radical, because that is the future. If we don't do that as a community, I sometimes I feel very, I don't know if I can call India a country anymore. I can only call of brotherhood and love. I can have love for a community beyond territorial nationalism. I can have love for the common dignity of a man, no matter where he is. He could be born in Punjab, he could be born in Bangladesh, he could be born in Sri Lanka, he could be born anywhere, and I can still have a common dignity for them. And I think that is how we think about politics. Second, more women. We need the people on the ground fighting to be the leadership. People like me, my job is to be on the front line and put our bodies in line, but the leadership should go to people on the ground who have always fought this war. And I think those are some of the ways I think we should really start thinking about resistance, community, but also what future we want. Climate change is coming, which means that our futures are already going to be radically remade. COVID has shown us that the future is going to be many COVIDs, especially given. So how are we going to govern ourselves in this new world? We cannot continue to live like this. And thinking of a different way of living is, I think, is also very important to that project of resistance against fascism and Hindutva.
Thank you so much. And as I said before, it so deeply resonates, especially looking at it from a Sikh context. Like, the words of my elders are resonating, because, India has never been a home for us, no matter how hard we've tried. And no matter how hard, we continually kind of present ourselves as, we've taken this role of the Andata, right? And, that's still reminiscent with like the 80s, where we talked about how much grain we produced for the country. So, these questions have been, within Sikh circles for a really, really long time about what India means to us. And, we all say explicitly, India is a colonial project. It's a term that has come from the imagination of Europeans to classify billions of brown people under one label. And, and I think Hindu Rashtra has owned that term more than anyone else. I hand over to Nishant Singh.
I just want to dive into what you just talked about just now a little bit deeper, because there is sometimes there are, I guess, a little bit of pushback when we talk about all these issues of the state, and especially when you mention that you can't even view India as a state anymore. And I think that's something that resonates with a lot of folks. But when we have a conversation with individuals that have grown up in India and have a bit of a sense of nationalism, one thing they sometimes allude to is the idea that India post 1947 started off doing something called they started a nation building process. And they sometimes say that the process was co-opted by the Sangh or all these other organizations, and that's over in all the problems that we see today. Do you believe there is a difference between the Indian nation building project as it was envisioned by the so-called founders, or what we see today is exactly the vision that they wanted to enact, and it's not something that someone co-opted? Everyone that was in power at that time, this was exactly what they had foreseen or wanted.
I think what we really had with India was not, this is literally what's occupied me for 8 years, of thinking and traveling through India and writing the book, is also the idea that India was ambushed halfway to freedom, right? We were ambushed halfway to freedom. I say this we as because my grandfather was a communist. He was a freedom fighter. He fought. He was arrested. So in that sense, when I say we, I'm not talking to the founding fathers. I'm talking to millions of Indians who were colonial subjects who fought for an idea of freedom. That idea of freedom was very different for very many people. And of course, it's a subcontinent of millions of people. How is it that someone like me, who was born in the south of the country, could have the same ideas of freedom as like many of your communities? For instance, my family was never butchered in the partition, right? Yet there were other communities that were butchered. Your homes were remade. The greatest migration happened because of this. And despite the great sacrifices that we made, this was a holocaust that happened to birth freedom. But along with freedom, we birthed not one but three nations. And along with it, I think it was an act of transfer of power, not true freedom, right? It was called the transfer. It was the agreements of transfer of power. And who did we transfer power to? And what have they done? I think it's absolutely important for us to kind of go back to that moment. I don't know what the founding fathers thought. I also, because we've written history from their perspective for so long. Jinnah was a Muslim who ate pork and drank wine. Nehru had he was a Fabian socialist who spoke with an stiff British upper lip. Gandhi was a barrister who went on to. Even your Muslim and Sikh communities that were part of the active struggle were in some ways still deeply elitist. I wonder if a small fraction of people, though they were required, I'm not dismissing the role of those with money and education have to navigate corridors of power, but I wonder if that is truly a reflection of what a heaving millions wanted for freedom. What was revolutionary was that the constitution said that colonial subjects who had been nothing more than just colonial subjects are now free. We were equal. But the reality is that what political guarantees were given as a result of this revolutionary constitution did not translate into a social contract. The social revolution never happened. If the social revolution happened, they wouldn't have suspended right to life in Punjab for the first 30 years of its existence. Of course, they said it was a border state and all of that, but that still happened. We wouldn't have had Hasfa. We wouldn't have had those things. My grandfather was one of the first political prisoners in India. He was arrested by the newly independent Indian state in 1948 for working with a group of workers and union workers to organize workers for better living. So the first sedition laws were already being employed against the very people who fought for an idea of freedom. So I'm not an historian in that sense, and I do not know what the founding, I don't know if we should even call them founding fathers. What we had was transfer of power, and our freedom was ambushed halfway. We were ambushed halfway to freedom, and we are still fighting for those freedoms. And we will continue to fight for those freedoms because power will never concede. Power will never think that you and I deserve dignity. Power will never think that a woman should have the right to vote. Power would never think that people who believe in certain things are equal. But that's what power does. But resistance then is not an act of bravery. It's not an act of courage. Resistance then is an act of living. You have to resist in order to live because the state will otherwise not give you the very basic dignity required for you to live. And I think that is something that we've learned both from the communities that have always resisted India, communities in Punjab, in Kashmir, in all of these communities that faced a discriminate violence. In Tamil Nadu, it was very different. any aspirations for a Tamil state was immediately put down. And in some ways, we were incorporated into the. Of course, there is a large Dravidian movement that again challenged the Brahminical state, and yet we were incorporated. We didn't have an ASFA imposed on us. We didn't have the kind of indiscriminate state violence that communities in Punjab and Kashmir faced, and others in Northeast faced. So I think it's really important for us to understand what freedoms were denied to us. And it's okay to fight for freedom and dignity. Fighting for freedom and dignity is not an act of sedition. And I think that is something that we really need to normalize, because Hindutva is normalized the idea that dissent is sedition, that demanding dignity is treason, that demanding the state perform its function is being an anti-national or urban naxal. I think those are the kind of things that we should continue to fight, educate, again, agitate, and organize.
I think, like, we've been here, like, as Sikhs, we've been here with this moment of like resistance and trying to find space for us to just live with dignity for a very long time with India. It reminds me of the words of Sant Janel Singh, when their entire discourse was built around making Sikhs realize that they were Ghulam within India, that they were slaves within India. And in one instance, he was asked, what is the demand, right? What is it that you want? And he stuck his head up and sat straight, and he said, "Asi sir taan chak ke jeena chaਹੁੰਦੇ, we want to live with our heads held high." And so, like, that resistance to India it's been like at the core of what's been driving the Sikh resistance for a really long time. So kind of shifting back to the present day, can you give a bit of a basic overview of the policies pursued by the BJP post 2014 to advance this project of Hindu Rashtra, i.e. the destruction of Babri Masjid, the reconstruction of Ram Mandir, CAA, Section 370, etc.? Oh, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I think when Modi came to power in 2014, I think what we have to remember is that the entire intellectual class of India, the liberal intellectual class of India, said that power will moderate Modi, that this man will remake the political landscape, because fine, he committed genocide, but everybody does. Everybody does genocide, so let's give him a chance. Which now, again, all of them have now retracted back. So even in 2014, BJP came with the agenda of development and economic growth. For them, development is not the dignity of the common man, the dignity of the man on the street. Again, when I say dignity of the common man, I'm not trying to make this in the sense of the common man is not India's middle class. That's a very small. I talk about the people who work on daily wages, people who think about, who keep this country going, the people who built our cities, the people who continue to keep it, right? That common dignity was never offered. And what it really came on, the idea is that indiscriminate plundering of the societies, whether it's the forwards, whether it's the Adivasi land, but all of this also happened alongside a spate of lynchings, right? Spate of lynchings, the Home Minister calling the migrants termites. In general, any kind of dissent was being already challenged. So with 2019, the economy was already not doing as well as it was supposed to. There was resistance, but also understand that 2014 also became the place to put things in place that would make it hard for BJP to lose. So there's a difference between easy to win and hard to lose. The electoral bonds. Journalist Poonam Agarwal has done extensive reporting on everything that is wrong with the election commission, how rigged the system is, how, in so many ways, the process, the laws, everything is deeply rigged. So you're already making, you're putting in a plan that will make it hard for the BJP to lose. Not easy to win, hard for BJP to lose. Second, you also see the rise of a certain kind of a journalistic political pundit class that becomes absolutely empowered to do whatever. I'm not just talking about the Arnab Goswamis of the world. I'm not talking about the rabid hate mongers. You see, I just call this the surgery to remove the spine of everybody. And the people most complicit are not just the rabid hate mongers, but you see it in NDTV, the way they cover business people, the way they cover politicians, the way they give platform to rabid right wingers. You recently saw Barka Dutt bring in an activist and start questioning about Khalistan as a way to discredit him, saying, oh, what about the rights of the soldier? No, a soldier and a Kashmiri who lives in the most militarized part of the world are not the same. Yet you have these spokespersons who are seen as rational, liberal, secular, consistently creating propaganda. And we have the race and the empowerment of this class. Again, all of this starts much a decade before, but now they have just indiscriminate, just not indiscriminate. They just have more resources to do that. So you already, 2014 to 19 was the preparation for what was to come in 2019. In 2019, there was a conference in which one of India's very famous lawyers said, this was a few months before the elections, and the projection was that BJP would not come back with a majority. And this lawyer, one of the very famous lawyers in India, said in the conference that if BJP comes back to power, India as a constitutional republic will be dismantled. And everybody was like, absolutely right. You know, we have to fight for this. And then somebody in the room said, but what if BJP wins? And the room went silent. Because at that moment, it became very clear that India's secular liberals had no pulse on the nation. They knew what would happen, but they hadn't planned for the eventuality that BJP would come back to power. That moment of silence is something that stayed with me, because these are some of India's most smartest, most revered, most accomplished scholars, all of them in New York, having a conversation about the future of the country, about India as a constitutional democracy. Yet, as early as February of 2019, and these are not bad people, these are all, that's the thing, right? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. These are all good, decent, common folk who believed in the goodness of the republic, but hadn't planned that BJP would come back. So now when BJP comes back in the first 100 days, you have the unconstitutionally revokes the special status for the Muslim majority Jammu and Kashmir. Again, it silenced 8 million people and under an unprecedented information blockade, the longest in history. The only other country that comes close to is Myanmar, but Myanmar is an authoritarian regime. And then, you know, what happened soon after the genocide followed. After that, you had the unlawful UAPA was amended again, and now it can designate individuals as terrorists unilaterally, which means that without any proof, without any evidence, the state can call you a terrorist, and then you'll have to spend the rest of your life proving that you're not. Again, this is a reversal of the idea of burden of proof, which is, again, UAPA has always been unlawful. Second, you had the Right to Information Act that was absolutely diluted, which means that the state can get all the information from you through Aadhaar, through surveillance, but you can no longer ask the state of any information. So you had that happen soon after. And once that happened, it followed but the Babri Masjid decision, when the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Hindus. And then soon after, you had the National Register released, in which effectively it rendered 1.9 million people stateless. We also know that Genocide Watch released 2 warnings for genocide in Assam, both in Assam and Kashmir. Of course, starting February, you know that the violence was unleashed. Since then, we've also have to think about, well, these have been in law. We haven't spoken about the gutting of the PSUs. Every single government institution, the airport authority, the shipping, everything is being gutted and sold to the corporates, which means that all institutionals guarantees are being gutted. The PSUs being gutted has not been in news as much. And then now you have the farmers bill, which again means that you are making your people the citizens of a republic, nothing more than serfs who will have to respond and produce food and cereals for the global market. And another aspect of it, which again Navyug has written about, is not only what this means for the dignity and the livelihood of people, but also food security of a billion people. Like what happens now? Tomatoes that are 4 rupees a kilo are being sold for 15 rupees on the Ambani website. What is it called? They have a Reliance shopping website. I don't know. I mean, so what is worth 4 rupees is now being sold for 15 rupees already, and they're saying, "Oh, stand with the farmers." So again, what you really see is gutting of everything. You are destroying the livelihoods of people. You are destroying those who fight for it. You are basically making it easy for 2 or 3 or maybe 4 corporate houses to become absolute plunderers who can extract anything, who can do anything. And this doesn't even start to, and we have not even talked about Aadhaar, the surveillance regime, how the Indian government has already sold Aadhaar data to Israel to mine biometric details from us. So they've already sold information. India and Israel, again, India and Israel as a part of the trade deal have actually sold the biometric and the Aadhaar details to be mined and used. And again, we have not even begun to think about the Russian money that's coming. Nobody knows why Russian money is coming into India now. Who is owning it? Who is facilitating it? Who is benefiting from it? There's just so much that is happening that we do not know. And I think this is such an important moment for all of us because so much is happening and this is our last stand. If we do not fight now, what is going to be on the other side? I don't think any dystopian fiction can even begin to articulate what lies on the other side if they're complete and they manage to succeed and crush whatever resistance is in India.
So looking at we've been flying through it, and thank you so much. We've only got a short amount of time left. I think we're going to have to do another part to this discussion. There's so much more ground that needs to be touched upon. But looking at BJP's rise to power and how they've kind of responded to the CAA protests, how they responded to resistance in Kashmir, how do you feel the Delhi Morcha fits into this picture? What similarities or differences do you see? Does anything stand out to you in particular? Do you see any different opportunities? Any opportunities for building solidarity between anti-Hindutva forces across the subcontinent?
I think what is really great is that these 31 unions, I think it's 31 unions, correct me if that number is wrong, 31 unions who called for the protests, who've gone in, they went in knowing it's going to be a long haul. I think that is the idea that this is going to take time and this is not going to be quick, I think is something that I think that was a lesson learned. Second, someone said this, and I can't now remember who said it, is that the idea of langar becoming a part of the protest. And someone said that langar is not about feeding people, it's an anti-caste institution. And I think I don't remember who said this, so I'm going to apologize for not remembering who said this. I think that's very important, that everything we do has to be anti-caste. It has to be the dignity of the land, because We're not just fighting for the dignity of the farmers who have land. We're also fighting for the dignity of vast majority of the people who don't have access to land. I think that's important. So anti-caste practices are important. Third, I think what is really great is how successfully the cell phone towers of Geo have been consistently. It matters. And there's something that Martin Luther King says before he's assassinated. He says that I'm not just asking for political equality, I'm asking for economic equality. I'm going to go after the people who benefit from my subjugation. So, who benefits from the subjugation of people? It is these big houses. And the fact that you're going after the money, right? I think that is absolutely important. Resistance only makes sense if those who make money can no longer make money. Slavery was abolished not because the goodness of a bunch of people. Slavery was abolished because it became economically unviable to do so. Apartheid South Africa as a regime crumbles when economically it becomes unable to do so. India becomes independent from the British Empire when the empire becomes too expensive for the colonizer. You have to make the oppressor pay. They don't care about dignity. You can call the great, not the great, the rich, wealthy business families named. You can do exposés on them. They don't care. But what the oppressor always cares about is if it becomes economically unviable for him or her to continue doing what they do. So the economic angle is absolutely important. You go after everything that gives them the resources. You kneecap them in a place where, that's why Chakka Jam is so powerful. And that's why, Sharjeel remains, is that what does Chakka Jam do? It basically makes you realize that the inconvenience you experience for 1 hour or 1 day or 1 week is the indignity that some communities have to live through the entire life without. That is why blocking a road, making it inconvenient, because it's no longer inconvenience then, right? I think that is why these tactics matter. You're telling someone that you want to throw away, if you cannot live with an inconvenience of a road being blocked for 4 hours, you want us to live with the inconvenience of indignity for the rest of our life. And I think that is why it is very important. But I think what the left and progressive voices in India, and I say this of the English speaking ones, I do not know what's happening in Punjab right now at a very ground level, is communicating this in a way that the local population understands. People want to be a part of revolution where they feel that they are counted. And I think that is where we've lost. We don't make our people feel counted, especially when we demand so much courage from them. And I think that is really where it matters. You go after the economic, you make it that hierarchies disappear, that we have to fight for a better world, anti-caste. You go after the money, kneecap them where it requires. Make people understand that what you think is inconvenience is actually what most people have to live with for the rest of their life. And finally, you make people believe that they are part of revolution, that a better tomorrow is not a rhetoric, because a better tomorrow is the only way for us to live with any kind. And I think these protests are beginning to do that. I find it absolutely phenomenal that there is a conversation around anti-caste movement. I think it's phenomenal that I don't think we understand really the scope of what Punjab is doing right now. I don't think we understand. I don't think it's being reported. And I think as long as people believe that they are part of a revolution, people will give anything for it. Everybody wants to belong. And if we do not cultivate that, I think that's when we fail. And I think that's why we have failed so badly, so often. But then again, as I said, these are all learnings from people on the ground. None of this is what I'm saying. All of this is learnings that I've heard from people on the ground. And if we can keep that, I think that is something. And I think putting the state on the back foot is the first step. But again, then we have to plan for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. I'm in my 30s now, and I believe that I'll probably live another 30 years. And I'm assuming I'm giving myself till 60. When I leave this world, what am I going to leave behind? Right? What have I built that I'm going to leave behind? And I think those are the kind of conversations we should be having today, so that in 30 years, we don't leave the mess that someone has left for us.
Thank you so much, and that's such a powerful thought to kind of bring this conversation to a close. This idea of cultivating revolution, and if we talk specifically like about the Punjab Sikh context to this recent agitation, that like cultivation is kind of being like limited at the moment because of demonization and because of fear. And one like example that comes to mind is like the personification of Punjab's revolutionary spirit. We have to go back to Udham Singh and Bhagat Singh because they offer us a sense of pride, but at the same time, they don't offer a challenge to Delhi in the way that Punjab's recent revolutionary Sikh heroes did. And they've been talking about, you know, indigenous sovereignty, building radical solidarity across India's oppressed, marginalized masses. And that was always at the core for the first battle for Khalistan that we saw. And you know, in the proclamations in 1986, where they talked about we need to build an all India united minorities front to fight, you know, the tyranny of Delhi and the Brahmin hegemony that's being imposed from the center. So that's always been there, and I feel like in this present moment, if that spirit penetrates the discourse and comes into, you know, the forefront, and it has a big hurdle of state terrorism to overcome, and that's why it's, you know, so underneath the surface. But if we can somehow cultivate that spirit across different communities, across, you know, the subcontinent and the global diaspora, I think we can be in good stead to answer that question in the next 20 years of what we're leaving. So thank you so much for your time and for coming today, and thank you to everyone for participating. I'll pass it over to you if you have any final remarks, any final comments, and then you know, we'll bring it to a close.
If I may, let's not forget that the biggest terrorists in the world are the states, not the people.
Yeah.
The word terrorist was first used to talk about state terror, not people. So I think it's something that we should educate our communities. The biggest terrorists are the states, not people fighting for the dignity and freedom.
Thank you so much. A powerful note to end it on, and thank you to everyone that's watching on Zoom and on YouTube. Please subscribe to our mailing list on Panth-Punjab.org, and we'll continue to bring more conversations for you all. Thank you so much. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.